During a heated live talk show appearance, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Ibrahim Traoré, is met with unexpected disrespect from a smug and confrontational host. What happens next shocks the entire studio. With sharp words and commanding presence, Traoré turns the tables live on air, leaving the host stunned and the audience roaring in disbelief. This moment instantly went viral, showing the world his strength, class, and unshakable resolve. Monday evening, 6:45 p.m., Paris, inside Studio 5 of the national TV station, Leo Direct. Cameras were rolling. The crowd was buzzing. Tonight's episode of Favor had been teased for weeks. The guest, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, revolutionary leader and acting president of Burkina Faso. It was meant to be a respectful interview, but behind the scenes, something else was brewing. The host, Marc Delarme, was known for his sharp tongue, smug smirks, and veiled insults, especially toward African leaders. And tonight, he came ready. Traoré walked into the studio calmly in a modest suit with no flashy pins or decorations, just his usual focused eyes and unshakable posture. He greeted the crew warmly. Marc didn't stand to shake his hand. Their light blinked on Ive. Marc leaned forward, with a cold smile. "President Traoré," he began. "Should I call you that or rebel commander?" The audience gasped softly. Ibrahim's face remained still. "Tell me," Marc continued. "Do you really believe you have the experience to set it with real-world leaders?" What he didn't know was that this night wouldn't go as planned, and by the end it would be Marc whose career would never recover. The room fell silent. Marc chuckled smugly, as if he had scored a point. He looked into the camera, expecting applause, but none came. Ibrahim Traoré leaned back gently. His eyes didn't show anger, only disappointment. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned slowly and looked toward the studio audience. His gaze lingered on a young black girl seated in the front row, eyes wide with hope. Then he finally spoke. "In my country," he began calmly, "we don't measure a man's worth by how much he wears on his chest, but by how many children sleep safely at night because of him." The room held its breath. Marc shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, you've been accused of..." Ibrahim raised his hand politely, not aggressively, and said, "Let me finish." The audience leaned forward. "People like you," he said slowly, "think power is wearing a tie in Paris, but real power is standing in front of your people when bullets fly and refusing to run." Gasps echoed. Marc's lips twitched. Ibrahim leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You ask if I belong with world leaders. I ask you, do they belong with their people?" Backstage, the control room was frozen. One producer whispered. He flipped it. "Strike you." Director stared at the screen. No, he owned it. In the studio, Marc tried to recover. "That's very poetic, President, but poetry doesn't stop terrorists." Ibrahim's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. "You're right," he said gently. "But dignity does. Hope does. A leader without hope is more dangerous than any gunman." Then he did something no one expected. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "This," he said, "is a letter from a 9-year-old girl in Kaya. Her village was attacked. She lost her father, but she still wrote to thank me for protecting her school." His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from truth. He read the letter out loud, and as he did, the entire audience went silent. Not out of fear, but out of shared pain. By the time he finished, even the cameraman's hands were shaking. Marc stared at his notes, completely lost. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a reckoning, and it was far from over. The studio had gone quiet. Ibrahim sat tall, calm, and unshaken. But you could feel the tension pulsing through the lights and cameras. That's when it happened. A woman in the audience, dark-skinned, softly dressed, stood up. Tears already streamed down her face. "I know you," she whispered. "My father used to tell me about leaders like you, men who fight for their people, not for money." "Marc," the host tried to cut her off. "Ma'am, this is not enough," she shouted, voice trembling. "You sit there mocking him, but you don't know what courage looks like. You've never had to protect a village, hold a dying child, or stand alone against the world. The whole room froze. Ibrahim didn't move, his eyes locked with hers. "You're not just a guest," she said to him. "You're hope." That word, hope. Mark looked lost, fidgeting with his pen. For the first time, he saw that this wasn't just politics. It was pain, history, pride, and someone had just awakened a sleeping lion. By dawn, the internet had erupted. TikTok loops, YouTube shorts, Facebook reposts. The woman's cry, "You're not just a guest, your hope," was now everywhere. 100 languages, 1,000 shares, and right beside her in that same clip, Ibrahim Traoré's silent, steady face. No anger, no clapback, just dignity. In Ouagadougou, students marched peacefully, holding up cardboard signs that read, "Hope wears uniform. Our voice is no longer silent." At a cafe in Paris, a little boy of African descent watched the clip on his tablet. He turned to his mother and said, "Is he aching?" "No." She smiled. "Something better. He's a servant of his people." Meanwhile, Mark's bosses weren't smiling. They called an emergency meeting. Sponsors were threatening to walk. Comment sections were brutal. And yet, Traoré said nothing. He didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't boast. Because when a lion walks, he doesn't need to roar. The studio called Ibrahim's team. "Please, we need him back. This time we'll give him a full hour. No interruptions." But the president didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked the streets of Lyon quietly that evening, visiting a refugee shelter. No cameras, no press, just his presence. A little girl hugged him. They said, "You're like magic," she whispered. He knelt. "No, I'm just a man. But magic happens when people believe in each other." Back at the hotel, his assistant handed him the official invitation for the second appearance. He read it slowly, then said softly, "Tell them I accept." Pause. "But this time I'll bring my brothers with me." "Which brothers, sir?" the assistant asked. Traoré smiled. "The ones whose voices were never invited." The second appearance wasn't just a return. It was a reckoning. This time, Ibrahim didn't walk into the studio alone. Behind him came a silent row of guests, men and women from Africa and the diaspora, a nurse from Bamako, a war orphan from Sudan, a professor from Dar. Each had their story. Each had been unheard for years. The host, Mark, tried to smile, but his face twitched. The crowd noticed. Ibrahim shook his hand. "Thank you for inviting us," he said gently. "We've brought some truths with us." There was no anger in his tone, but the air was heavy. As they sat, the cameras rolled and history began to write itself. The nurse spoke first. She held up a photo of a burned-down hospital in Burkina Faso. Terrorists destroyed this place. President Traoré sent supplies within 48 hours. He didn't call a press conference. He just acted. Mark blinked, unsure what to say. Then the professor spoke. "My university was losing funding." He redirected his own salary for a semester to keep it running. One by one, stories poured in. No screaming, no drama, just proof. The audience sat stunned. Mark's face was pale. This wasn't the show he planned, and it was far from over. Then the youngest guest stood, a boy, maybe 12, nervous, small, but burning with something inside. He cleared his throat. His French was shaky. I don't have a papa. I live in a camp. One day, President Traoré came. No camera, no car, just him. Silence. I told him I wanted to be a soldier. He said, "No, be a builder. Build what they tried to destroy." He gave me shoes and books. The crowd gasped. The boy took out a tiny, worn-out French book from his jacket. He gave me this. A tear rolled down his cheek. He gave me dreams, music. Mark looked down. He had nothing left to say because in that studio, something greater than ratings had arrived. Truth. Mark couldn't take it anymore. The audience had shifted. They were no longer amused. They were moved, and that frightened him. He slammed his hand on the table. Enough of this emotional circus. He barked. Gasps filled the room. "You're a president, not a preacher. This is politics, not a sob story session." But Trey didn't flinch. He looked at Mark calmly. Then he said, "Maybe you mistake power for noise. Let me show you what power really is." He pulled out a file, a live document from the Burkina Faso government. Screens lit up behind them with real-time reforms, schools being reopened, farmers receiving aid. No speeches, just evidence. Mark's mouth hung open. The audience began to clap, not for show, but from the soul. A backstage assistant was secretly recording. With her phone, she caught the moment Trey turned to Mark and said, "History won't remember insults, but it will never forget impact." Within minutes, that clip hit social media. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By nightfall, 10 million. In Burkina Faso, young boys in villages gathered around old radios, replaying every word. In France, celebrities shared the video in stunned admiration. Even critics were forced to admit, this man, he didn't shout. He simply stood. People cried watching it. Not out of pity, but out of pride. Finally, a leader who didn't perform, he proved. After the broadcast, Mark stormed into the green room. His hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of water. He had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré, not just the man, but what he carried: truth, vision, pain, hope. Then, the door creaked open. Traoré stepped in, alone. But this time, Mark didn't speak. Traoré walked up to him and said softly, "The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs brave ones." Then, without waiting for a reply, he left. Mark sat down slowly. He looked at the now empty seat across the room. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed. So had millions of others. By morning, the video had reached every corner of Africa. In Ouagadougou, an elderly man wiped his eyes. "That's my president," he whispered to his grandchildren. A young girl in Paris hugged her mother. "He looks like us. He speaks with heart." In Europe, the media scrambled to spin it. Some said Traoré was too emotional. Others called him dangerous, but none could deny one truth. The people were rising behind him. At the presidential residence in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat silently with his team. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was thinking, because something bigger had started and it couldn't be stopped. Traoré's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered. A quiet voice spoke in broken French. It was Mariam, a nurse in northern Burkina Faso. "I don't know if this is really you, but thank you. My son watched your video and said, 'Mama, I want to be like him.' I've never seen him so proud to be Burkinabe." Ibrahim's voice broke. He didn't say much, just 2 words. "Thank you." After the call, he looked out the hotel window. The Eiffel Tower shone in the distance, but his heart was in Kaya, in Dori, in the dusty streets of Bobo-Dioulasso. This wasn't just about TV anymore. It was about dignity. Mark hadn't slept. He rewatched the video again and again. He had mocked a man who stood for millions. He had spoken over pain. But the world didn't cancel him. They ignored him. That hurt more. In the studio, producers whispered about replacing him. His ratings were dropping. Then he made a rare decision. He went live again. No crowd, just him. He looked into the camera and said, "I disrespected a man who represents something I didn't understand. I was arrogant. I was wrong." The clip didn't go viral, but Traoré saw it. He smiled gently, not because he had won, but because truth had finally been heard. Across Africa, people didn't just watch the moment, they felt it. In Accra, a group of university students marched with handmade signs. "Ibrahim, you spoke for us." In Bamako, elders sat around radios, nodding as they replayed the show. Even in refugee camps across the Sahel, children mimicked his calm tone, repeating his words with pride. Burkina Faso's streets overflowed with peaceful supporters. No protests, just pride. The same youth once hopeless now raised their flags. Traoré hadn't spoken for applause, but the world gave him one anyway. Not because he wanted it, but because he deserved it. A woman from the village of Feta wrote a letter to the presidency. She didn't expect it to be read, but it reached him. She wrote, "President, Ibrahim, my son, died last year during a terrorist attack. We buried him with no flag. Today, I watched you on that French program. I cried, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I felt seen. Thank you for making us proud to be from this land. A grieving mother. Ibrahim held the letter for a long time. Then he walked alone into the hotel courtyard. He looked at the stars and whispered for all of them, I will not stop. 6 days after the interview, Traoré returned to Ouagadougou. No red carpet, no orchestra, but tens of thousands lined the road, not waving signs, just placing their right hand over their heart. A gesture of silent respect. Even the children stood still. Ibrahim stepped out of the plane, looked at them, and simply nodded. No words, no speeches. He had already said enough. That single moment, a leader walking quietly into his nation with the people behind him, became the most shared video of the year. He hadn't fought with anger. He fought with dignity and the world. Listen forever. If this story moved your heart, please don't scroll away. Like this video if you felt even a single tear. Comment below with one word, respect. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that celebrate truth, dignity, and African strength. And please share this story. Let the world know that men like Ibrahim Traoré still exist. Thank you for watching. Long live courage. Long live Burkina Faso.